Don't forget to love people.
If people will remember that every single day of their life, this world will be a much better place, Alex.
Sure would.
You know, in the Bible, they asked Jesus, what are the most important of all the commandments? And then the Lord said, love your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. One of the reasons why I do this podcast is because I see the media is so horrible now.
It really does seem to have gotten worse, right? People are now more open about them not being that way.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Leaders in Tech podcast, where we shine the light to leaders in technology that are exploding in blessings the organizations they are working for. Today we have with us Alexander Jackl. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Alex, I have this habit of not pronunciating correctly people's names. So can you give me again your full name? Where do you live and what do you do for a living?
My full name is Alex. I call myself Alex, but Alexander Jackl, and I live in Warwick, Rhode Island, in the United States. And I do many things for a living, but one of the things I mostly do is I provide leadership and guidance around data architecture, design, and governance, mostly for education entities, whether it's the federal government or state agencies or colleges or educational vendors.
That's beautiful. You also act as the CIO for Landmark, right?
Yes, and I'm right now I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Landmark Worldwide.
That's beautiful. So your focus is in technology towards education then, right?
Yes, in almost every case. Some of the work I've done with the federal government involves the workforce as well, inside that sort of an umbrella called lifelong learning, which deals from the very beginning, kindergarten, nurseries, all the way up to on-the-job training, employment records, and retirement education. So there's a very strong movement afoot in education to really look at learning as a lifelong activity rather than as just a thing that happens in high school or college or grammar school kind of thing.
That is amazing, Alex, and it's incredible that you're able to service so many different things while having such a strong position with a large organization. How do you accomplish that? How do you divide your day so you can actually be of so much value?
Well, part of it is, in some ways, it doesn't work to do 10 things at the same time. You need to do one thing at a time in a way, right? And so part of it's momentum, right? Over the course of my career, I've done a lot of work with various of these organizations. And then that work I've set up so that the organization is either set up to continue working and all I need to do is advise them or guide them or give them help when they run into trouble, or I work too hard and have a terrible work-life balance.
That happens to a lot of us, that's for sure.
So, yes.
Alex, how was the beginning of your career? Let's look back in time, because a person like you, this podcast is dedicated to a lot of other top technology leaders, but also people that want to break into the positions that you and I hold right now. So let's look back in time. Did you go to university? If you did, what did you go to school for?
Well, I went to school for physics. I wanted to be an astrophysicist. That was my dream. I loved Carl Sagan was my hero. I wanted to be an astrophysicist and a communicator about science. I loved science. And so I went to school. However, I quickly discovered that I hated doing physics. I loved studying physics and I loved math and I loved all that, but I was just when I started actually working as a physicist, I discovered that sitting in a lab in front of a computer doing math all day, every day, 30 days a month was not the job I wanted. I needed to talk to people. I needed to generate ideas. I needed to, and although I loved physics, it soon became clear to me that wasn't the job for me. And then I studied technical writing. I got a bachelor's degree in technical writing afterwards. And then, so I could communicate then about science and technology. And then I studied information systems at MIT. And I was very interested in how all these systems communicated with each other and how to build systems that had raw data at one end and then generated information that was actionable and usable at the other end. And then I spent many years as a technical writer, as a consultant, as a, that kind of thing. And at one point, I was leading a seminar. Actually, I was working as a seminar leader for Landmark and leading an integrity seminar on integrity. And one of my students was working for the Department of Education in Massachusetts. And the associate commissioner was having a big problem because they had a huge $5 million contract to deploy student IDs, to deploy reporting from the districts to the state. And they were halfway through the 5-year project and had nothing. And so they had a retreat, and the associate commissioner needed a facilitator to run the retreat. And so the person who was in my seminar who was working for him said, "Hey, I know this guy, he probably could help." And so I facilitated a weekend retreat that he did with his team. And at the end of which I told him, I said, "You are in such trouble." I said, "There's no way to get from here to there with the people you have now." Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, that's the last time I'll ever work for him, right? and then but he ended up just bugging me, and he actually asked me to come to the Department of Education and run their entire information system department. Wow. And I was like, "You're insane." I said, "I don't have any background in education. I don't even have background in computers, although, in my training as a physicist, of course, I use computers, right? But I'm not a computer guy. Why would but eventually he wore me down. And a couple of months later, I accepted his offer and I became the director of application development for the Department of Education in Massachusetts. Wow. And that was by the way, I would never have hired me for that job. I was too young. I was inexperienced. I didn't know what I was doing. But I did have a passion for the work, and I worked hard, right? And I really got the bug. I actually saw the gap between what was possible and what was happening in education with data. And I realized there was an enormous amount of advancement that could be made, and we could really serve kids way better if we just had better data systems. And so right. I got very passionate about it, and I never left education after that. That pretty much I've been in education for the rest of my career, for the last
information systems for education.
yeah. And so I then went on to when I left the Department of Education, I was there for 4 or 5 years. When I left the Department of Education, I founded a nonprofit with the associate commissioner who hired me that was called the U.S. Open E-Learning Consortium, which was about states working together so they weren't reinventing the wheel. And that's when I got interested in standards. And I joined the A4L, what was at the time called the Schools Interoperability Framework, which is a data standard for education in K-12. And I joined a group called the IMS Global Learning Consortium, which was another education data standard, primarily with workforce and higher education. And I got very interested, and I became the chairperson for the technical board for the K-12 data standards, and I'm still in that role. I have been in that role for almost 18, 20 years now, right? And I've grown to think that standardization is the only answer. Not, by the way, I'm not talking about standardized tests. I'm talking about standardizing data, right? So that if you talk about a school, this is how you describe a school. And every vendor, every system describes a school the same way. That way you don't have to retool your code or retool your systems every time you buy a new vendor or every time you change environments. And so I did that for a while, and I I sold the nonprofit to a think tank. I was their CIO for a while, and then I started a company, and we built what are called longitudinal data systems for states, which is the sort of reporting up to the federal government, the education data that the state is collecting. And we sold that company to Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and I became a vice president at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and their chief data scientist. And I stayed that role for 2 or 3 years, and then I started my own consulting company, Bardic Systems, which is, was still active. I have architects working for me right now, working with various colleges, various agencies. And then I had been working with Landmark Worldwide for quite some time. And I, but not in an official capacity in any way, but then they were a brick and mortar organization. They taught seminars, live seminars where people went to locations. And when COVID hit, it was disastrous, right? It was just a disaster for that business model. And about 2 years ago, I came on staff with them to help them sort of navigate that, that treacherous abyss of how do you move from a brick and mortar model of teaching and educating people and having work that actually impacts the students in a powerful way, and do that over Zoom, and do that in an online way, and how to change it so it's not just a camera at the back of a room, with someone talking. How do you actually create online content that's digestible as online content in this new world? And so about a year ago, they made me the chief technology officer. I replaced the one that was already there, and now we're on our way to building sort of a new era of using mobile, and we have a mobile app coming out, and all of our courses are online, and we're doing 37 to 60 courses a week, all over the world, and all of it online over Zoom, and so we're in a new era now, right? And now, of course, there's all the challenges that come along with that, which is exciting. So that's a probably overlong story of my professional life, but there you go.
That's a fascinating career, and by the way that you look and by the way that you feel, I can tell that you have never worked a day in your life. You love what you do, don't you?
Sometimes when I've been working for the man, I occasionally have not been satisfied, right? But most of my life I've been blessed because I'm working on things I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about the data standards. I'm passionate about doing the right thing for education. And I'm passionate about moving the whole educational ecosystem in a direction that makes a difference for people, for kids, for adults, for everyone who's educating themselves, who's committed to something and wants to create something. And that's why I love working for Landmark Worldwide. That's why I love working with the data standards and that work I do, the pro bono work I do with them. So it's, I'm very lucky.
Yeah, I'm a man of faith, and so I love the Lord Jesus Christ with all my heart, and I got lost, Alex. I got lost in the ability to make money. I started like you. I was in love with databases, data standards. I was in love with data automation and with business process automation. I started writing code when I was 16 years old. And I fell in love with computers because I realized that I could actually, it's funny enough, back then in the 80s, if you don't have a typewriting exam done, you couldn't graduate from high school. And I could never finish the stupid typewriting exam because one mistake and you had to start the page all over again. And then my uncle was already a CIO for a big bank back then. He didn't have that title back then, there were different titles, but he was in charge of the entire computer systems for this bank. And one day he told me, you gotta come to my office. So I went to his office and he showed me my first text editor. And he showed me how to copy and paste on a mainframe. And I couldn't believe it. And he pressed the print button and this letter came out, and I'm like, and I did that in a fraction of the time that I would have done in a typewriter.
Yes.
That was the pivotal moment when the Lord showed me I was built to do business process automation. And I never looked back. I never looked back, I was 15 years old back then. I started writing code when I was 16. But once I started my first business, money started to come in, and I fell in the trap of the love of money. So I left my passion away, and I was just so much focused on money that I even lost my faith. And then finally, I was building a jail so big that I couldn't get out until I realized that it was because I left my passion. Once I went back to my passion and actually really helping companies achieve their objectives through software automation, everything came back, and success came back, and abundance came back, and I have never worked a day in my life since then. And now I know that money is not the problem, it's the love of money, and the Bible says it many times.
Yes. Yes.
It's incredible. Alex, in your career, what has been the biggest problem that you encounter, and how were you able to overcome it?
The biggest problem. Well, there are many problems, right? That in systems and in people, right? I think one of the biggest problems is that a loss of people. When you work, especially in large organizations, if you're working with the federal government or state agencies, there's a cynicism and a lack of hope that actually has people be very short-sighted sometimes. And if there's no possibility, if there's no future that people are living into, nothing that gives them that thing that gets them out in the morning, the passion to do their job, then people make very short-sighted decisions. And so I've seen many projects that would have been brilliant and made a huge difference in the world get killed because either people were greedy, or people were short-sighted, or people were thinking only in, okay, I have to make it to next quarter, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. And so I think that's been one of my most challenging areas, because I then make those people wrong. I say, oh, those people are bad. They're not, but the truth is they're just reacting to what they think they need to do to survive. And the biggest, I think the most way I've become most effective is in one of the things I actually learned at Landmark, which is, what we call enrollment, or creating possibilities for people. If you can actually listen for what people are really committed to, because everybody's committed to something, right? If you can listen for what people are committed to, and then actually help them design a path that has them fulfill on that, all of a sudden they're your partner. And all of a sudden they're working with you shoulder to shoulder to make that thing happen. And I think that's both the biggest thing that I find as an obstacle that I've been frustrated by in my career. And it's also, however, overcoming that is the thing that makes, everything possible. And I think is necessary. If you're going to be a leader and create new structures and new pathways for organizations and for people, you need to listen for what they're really committed to and not be stopped by whatever the circumstances are that are in the way.
That's amazing, for sure. And it's for me, when you face things like that and you have failure in front of you, it's not a failure if you learn from the experience. And you can pick yourself up again and try again in a different way that's going to avoid that failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in my career, most of the success that I've had is because the failures that I experienced just before the success happened. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. Well, there's that, I forgot who said it, but there's that famous saying that, before every yes, there's 100 no's, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I look at yourself, yeah, right? Like most people go to college, and if they have the wrong career, they just don't care because they just did it. And their life becomes frustration, and it's horrible. And it's because they didn't realize there was a failure that needed fixing. The Bible said the just failed 7 times, but they picked themselves up 7 times too.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. How many times are you willing to pick yourself up and do it again until you figure it out? For you, you realize astrophysics wasn't for you. You were not built to be behind a computer doing math. Thank God, because we wouldn't have such a nice leader as you are right now. We need more leaders like you. But what was in your mind? How did you figure out that you needed to go back to school and do something else so you could change your life?
Well, I mean, on one hand, it was very obvious, right? Because I was working with this physicist at Brown, and we were doing this cool study. We were studying the behavior of electrons near the surface of metals in a vacuum. We were doing superconductor research. We were trying to find superconducting materials, right? And at one point, I started an equation on Monday. And on Thursday, it wasn't working out. Like, I knew it wasn't working out. And then I realized that on Monday, I had made a sign error. And everything was wrong. And I was going to have to restart the entire thing over again. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, this is what my life is going to be like for the next years if I do this. That's what it's going to be. And by the way, I have profound respect for people who can do it. People who have that focus, that intensity, that they can just work on the same problem, never resolving it for 10 years, and then have a breakthrough. I have enormous respect. Thank God there are people like that, right? Yeah. But I was not one of them. That wasn't my thing, right? And then I said to myself, well, what is it that I want to do now? And I said, I still love science. I still love technology. I'm fascinated by information systems. Let's go that direction, right? Let's look to see what I can do there. And frankly, I'm blessed, right? I have, my parents really worked hard to give me all the education I needed. I was set up well. I am a white man in a world where white men have an advantage, and my parents trained me to work hard and to have a certain level of integrity. All those things made it possible for me to really, go back and succeed in a new world. And I'm very thankful for that. That's
Alex, you touched a great point. But maybe that was the case in the past, that having, being white in North America will have advantage. Yeah, of course, maybe the doors will be open a little better for you. But the truth of the fact is, I just interviewed a lady. She came to San Francisco right after finishing medical school in China. She came to do a master's degree. And she worked her way through. Now she's the CEO of this, $300 million hospital. And I came to Canada in 1991. I came to pursue a computer science degree, and I did whatever it took. I think the pattern, like, at least from my podcast, I have over 170 interviews in one of the podcasts, and this one, we're reaching 100 very fast. And all the successful leaders and entrepreneurs that I have interviewed, the pattern is that their parents or themselves, they were taught how to work hard and how to thrive after failure, regardless of your skin color. And I can see it. I've interviewed people of multi-billion-dollar banks that are people of non-Caucasian.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the homeless population, the homeless crisis that we have in North America, you see there is a lot of people that were raised and born in North America that are there in a homelessness situation.
Yeah.
So for me, the common denominator is that willingness to work hard and do whatever it takes to succeed, like you, finishing a degree in physics and going back and taking another degree. Right?
That's really good. No, I really got that. Yeah, I'm clear, by the way. It's not just because of that. It was just, that's one of the factors, right? I consider that as one of the many blessings I had, that I actually have advantages that, and my parents valued education. They valued hard work. My father worked his way up from being a machinist apprentice, to becoming the head of research and development for Spidell Textron, right? For his organization, right? And he did that just through sheer hard work. And he was smart and he educated himself, obviously, right? But it was really, and that was an inspiration for me in my life to do the same. And I value that, and I very much respect people who do that, who work hard, who are willing to work hard, who are willing to give themselves over to something larger than themselves.
For sure. If you had access to a time machine and you could go back 20 years in your career, and you could talk to the younger self of you, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, that's an interesting question. What advice would I give myself? Well, it depends how early. I, over the last few years, have learned to be, to have more tolerance for people. I was a little judgmental when I was younger, right? I judged people pretty harshly. If people didn't meet my standards of being smart enough or being good enough, right? Or who I would be very judgmental. And I think one thing I would tell my very young self is, dude, yeah. Don't do that, right? Everyone is as human as you are. Do not, go there, right? If you're worried about people, help them. Don't judge them, right? And so that would be one thing. The other thing that I think I would tell myself is don't undervalue yourself. There are decisions I made when I sold my first company. If I had been smarter and more mature and had more faith in the value of what I had created and what I had done, I would have way more financial resources now. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, whether you like it or not, money does make the world go round in a lot of ways. If you have money, then you have freedom. You have the ability to do things. You have the ability to things happen. So, and I'm not in any way bad off right now. I would have been much better off if I had valued myself more. A lot of times I sold out because I didn't value myself or I just wasn't aggressive enough not in a bad way aggressive, but like aggressive enough in the sense of, oh, these people are $1 billion company. They want my company, right? I should ask for what I think it's worth, really. And then if they don't like it, say no. Just say no, right? And it took me a long time to learn that, right? So I think those are the two things I would say to my younger selves.
That's beautiful advice, Alex. I did the same mistake back in 1990. When I graduated from computer science and went right into business, I thought that I could actually become a software consultant and nobody would trust a junior, right, with no experience. So I ended up selling computers. So I had a computer shop to make ends meet. And to make the long story short, at the end of 2 years, I was losing money and I really needed to sell the business in order to avoid bankruptcy. And this guy came and he offered me to buy the company. Mm. And it was kind of like a miracle because I didn't even put it up for sale. I was just praying with my wife that the Lord will deliver us because I was covered in debt and I was working a long hours just to lose money at the end of the month. And when this guy came out of nowhere and told me, how much do you want for your business? I gave him the number that I needed to get out of debt. That's it. So basically just transfer everything to the person and that's it. And then I realized I had over 2,000 customers in my Rolodex and the brand value alone was worth 3 times as much. But I didn't know, I just wanted to get out of debt. And he actually asked me 3 times, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Because, thinking this is too good to be true.
Yes.
But for us, when we are scientists, Alex, I had to learn to be an entrepreneur. I had to learn to be a business owner, and it's through those failures. Like, I was in love with computers and with computer science, and all I wanted to do is write software, and I wasn't doing that. I was doing that overnight. So I will have to build computers during the day, and then I will write software until midnight. And my passion was that. So I wasn't really paying too much attention to the money part, but to your point, I could have been much better off. Like I could have bought my first house 3 years earlier, for example.
Right. Right. Well, having my first child was the wake-up call. I was operating in almost a hippie mode of like, I didn't want money, didn't need money. Give me enough money so I can eat and like do what I want to do. I'll be fine, right? And then when I had my first child, I was like, oh my goodness, I really need money, right?
That's a good wake-up call.
Three children later, right? Oh, it's like, oh boy, So yeah, that reoriented me a little bit. And it was interesting. One of my partners I worked with early on, who I had hired at the Department of Education, and then later went into business with me. And the second company I owned, he was my partner in that company, and he's the one who really taught me that actually asking for what things are worth is not bad. Mm-hmm. It's not bad. That's just what you should do. Actually, that's appropriate, right? And he was someone who was committed to doing great things and a deeply faithful man, and had a profound relationship to his family and to God. And he was very clear also that his goal was to make himself and his family taken care of. And so he really got me on the train of financial success, of making sure that I was not undercutting my own success and taking care of my family. So that was a good lesson.
It's beautiful. And that's what life is about, just learning and growing, right?
Absolutely.
Alex, a lot of time has gone by already, and I don't want to over abuse your generous time. I'll ask you one last question before we finish the podcast. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
That's a great question. Don't forget to love people.
If people will remember that every single day of their life, this world will be a much better place, Alex.
Sure would.
In the Bible, they asked Jesus, what are the most important of all the commandments? And then the Lord said, love your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. So, and he said, with these two, if you do these two, the entire Bible is these two commandments. And isn't it true, right?
Yes, absolutely.
If we would just love each other a little better, one of the reasons why I do this podcast is because I see the media is so horrible now. The polarization, people fighting for political views, for religious views, for all kinds of things. And instead of just trying to be compassionate and loving each other and being kind to each other like we used to be. I remember back in the 90s, it was a lot better than now. Right?
It really does seem to have gotten worse, right? I'm not sure if it's really worse or if it's just that people are now more open about them not being that way, right? I'm not sure which it is, right? I'm not sure there's been actually a change in that, but rather a change in it being acceptable to say hateful and mean things, right?
Yeah. And the rise of social media, right? Like now you have a venue where you can express your voice without really without any disruption.
No accountability.
There is no accountability.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I remember one of my mentors told me, money will make more of who you are already. And it's the same with your expression, right? With your voice, with what you think. Whatever you put out of the mouth comes what's in your heart. And now that people have a way to express themselves without accountability, you're really seeing what's in their heart. Isn't it? Crazy, right?
Yeah, very crazy.
Alex, thank you so much for your time. God bless you. If people like to follow you, where can they find you online?
They can follow me. Actually, so I post on LinkedIn occasionally, and I'm not really right now. I'm not really podcasting or very active on social media, though I've started to do more presence on with Landmark, and so they can look up Landmark Worldwide, check it out and invite people to participate there if they like. And otherwise, anyone who wants to reach out to me can find me. I'm all over social media in terms of LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you so much. God bless you and have a beautiful rest of the week.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.